Well, welcome everyone to this last session on skills development. I'd like to open with a question. Have you ever considered that when it comes to your cloud migration, success will depend not only on picking the right technology, but also on skills development, technical skills development, as well as a general understanding of the cloud broadly in your organization? In this session, I'm going to share with you a few insights from customers who've gone on this very journey. And they've gone on the journey of trying to tackle some of the challenges they faced, and we'll talk about the solutions they put in place to address these skills challenges. And of course, we'll talk about the outcomes they achieved. In fact, about halfway through the session, I'll have John Cox from Australia Post join us to share his story with us firsthand. And I wasn't given a clicker. Thank you. So it's interesting, a leading group of chief executives recently said it best when they said that when it comes to cloud migrations, the biggest challenge is not the tech, it's still the people and the processes that must change and adapt. And that's a really old adage in our industry, people, processes, and technology. And it's still true today. You see, most IT leaders agree that they're moving some, if not all, of their workloads to cloud. And most also agree that they have a significant skills gap. This is both technical and also just an understanding of what the cloud even is, more broadly in the organization. And yet, this very same audience, when asked what their plan is to remediate that skills gap, will perhaps too often still answer this. A silence, a resounding silence, and that silence, I have to say, does have a cost. It expresses itself in a number of ways, and I'd like to talk about cloud perception challenges. So we're not talking about the technology. We're arguably not even talking about technical skills at this stage. We're literally talking about some of the business functions that are part of any of your organizations or departments and their understanding of the cloud. And I want to give you a few examples. If we take HR, for example, you wouldn't necessarily think HR will have an impact on your cloud strategy, but they do. I want to give you a specific case here. HR are involved in things like choosing who gets hired and what are the things that you're looking at when you're looking to hire talent. So if they don't know what cloud skills are, then they're going to struggle to hire the right people. And the same thing is true also from a talent development perspective. If they don't have a good understanding of what the cloud is, then they're going to have a challenge in making the right investments in people. I'll give you another example. Let's take finance. And I don't mean to pick on finance, but one of the things that finance are really good at is capitalization. I don't mean sending emails in all caps. No. I think we're all good at that at times. I mean the art and science of reporting and managing assets, capital assets, over the long term. Well, in a world of cloud, that becomes quite a different game. You need new skills now. You need skills about cloud economics and total cost of ownership in the cloud. That's a very different skill set. And the last one I'd like to talk about here is the risk team. Now, look, as a citizen and as a consumer, I'm really grateful that most organizations take my data and security really seriously. But if you're in a risk team, if you're a risk professional and you haven't had the opportunity to learn about cloud, then you're probably not going to be able to make good decisions about cloud adoption. So that's why we have specific training opportunities for all of these individuals. And the reason it matters is because everyone is trying their best, of course, but they're all working on the basis of best practices, which need an update if you're going to leverage the cloud to its potential, if you're going to achieve some of the key things that people try to achieve when they adopt cloud. Things like cost savings or innovation, innovative projects. And customers are really focused on avoiding this. This is an actual customer of ours who, early on in their AWS journey, said, we're moving all in on the AWS Cloud. And I love a bold statement. But for about a year, unfortunately, they weren't able to progress much. And part of it was the skills gap. So the way we address this, and customers, we work very collaboratively with our customers. AWS Training is no different to any other service in that we learn from our customers and with our customers. And so over the years, we've built a bit of a model for how do you build skills in any organization. And we look at 3 key pillars. Now, the first one is digital training. This is an excellent way to scale out and help everyone in the organization learn a little bit about cloud, basically achieve cloud fluency. By contrast, classroom training is where you have an opportunity to take perhaps a subset of your team and help them get exposed to, first of all, a qualified trainer and get interaction with a trainer one-on-one. They get to ask their questions. And also, they get to learn from their like-minded peers in the room. So that's really valuable as well. And the third key pillar here is the certifications, because they help you at an organizational level. They help you ensure that you're progressing on the learning outcomes that you're actually investing in. And at an individual level, of course, it helps you communicate your credentials and your skill level. Now, customers don't try to do all of this at once, of course. They build skills in phases. Skills are built cumulatively. This is a fact. So you build skills on skills. And the first phase is foundational. Now, this one is for everyone, both technical and non-technical. And we'll talk about what specific recommendations we have for everyone in the organization in a moment. Beyond that, we focus only on technical professionals. At the associate level, we're looking at the core discipline in our industry. Architects, developers, and system operators. What should they be doing? We have learning paths for them. And then the third phase is professional and specialty training, where we look at perhaps the leads. So we're looking at a further subset. We're looking at the tech leads, as well as specialists. Think security, data professionals. There's going to be something for them there. And this might be a 2 to 3 year journey, or faster or slower, depending on the pace of your migration. Now, learning is continuous. We've talked about digital before. You'd be doing that throughout. And I really recommend you also look at things like experiential days. This is things like hackathons or game days and immersion days, which we can help you with. It's really important to get some practical experience in there as well. So let's look at where we start. The foundations phase is where all parties in the organization would benefit from some training. This is true for those HR professionals, risk, and all the others that we had on that first few slides. Cloud Practitioner is an online course. It is available for free. It's your digital scale-out option. This is something you could distribute today or tomorrow and get people to progress on it. And they get that common knowledge achievement out of it. So you'll get people to understand common and key concepts like the shared security model. Then you have 2 pivots you can take on this. If you have a key decision-making audience, then Business Essentials might be more appropriate. This is a course which is face-to-face, and it's a bit more high level, but it still covers some of those key concepts around why cloud and how cloud. And then finally, on the other end of the spectrum, if you're technical, you'd be looking at the Technical Essentials as your foundational piece. All of these audiences can aspire to do the Cloud Practitioner certification. And again, to reiterate, all of them will cover the key topics that we should be covering when we're learning about cloud. Things like security, and everyone will have an understanding of what the cloud means for them and the organization as well. And then the final one, of course, is cost. Each of the attendees in any of these courses will have a much better understanding of things like cloud economics. But again, if you are a business function professional as opposed to an IT professional, then you want to focus on something like Cloud Practitioner or Business Essentials if you're a key decision maker. There are learning paths for everyone. I mentioned this earlier, and the 3 core ones in our industry I mentioned earlier as well. I'll talk about one specifically in more detail so that you have an understanding of what we mean by a learning path. But we're really keen to make clear recommendations regardless of what your profession is. And it's not just the common disciplines in our industry, it's also the specialist roles, such as machine learning professionals or security professionals. In fact, we have quite a number of certifications, and most learning paths lead to a certification. Again, this is a great credential at both an individual level and then an organizational level. So everyone could be looking at the Cloud Practitioner as a foundation, including non-IT professionals. And then you'd go from there if you're an IT professional. So I want to give a specific example now. Let's dive into the developer path. You can notice here that it starts with either Cloud Practitioner and or Technical Essentials. This will give you a solid foundation. And then from then on, at the associate level, you'd have the developer course, which is a 3-day in-person class. And a lot of our customers do that for their developers because it focuses on things like the APIs and the SDKs. And how do you achieve those things that you want to achieve on cloud, such as reliability and flexibility and cost effectiveness and so on, but from a developer's perspective. And with a bit of additional self-preparation, you'll be in a good place to achieve the certification. That's the associate level, and then a professional who's looking to develop their career further might proceed to the advanced level, which for us goes to the DevOps path, which is really logical when you think about it. And the DevOps path is interesting because the system operations professionals also merge into that path. So you can see how that common knowledge gets pooled. It's also interesting to note that some of these key trends in our industry, these other trends such as DevOps or machine learning, are domains which we can help you with in terms of skills development. And it makes sense because they've been actually powered by the cloud in many respects. So by any stretch of imagination, I do not say that training is the answer to everything. I really recommend you look at many other facets and opportunities to train your people up and develop skills. We've talked about training. I wanted to touch on partners. Many of you will leverage partners as part of your migration. And they will develop solutions, and as part of that, it makes sense that they should be doing a little bit of handover training as well. So they're part of the answer. Events like today, our summits, I'm hopeful you'll agree, are educational. I was just sitting in the keynote, and I was really amazed at the depth of the content that we were sharing just in a keynote, talking about details of our availability zones and so on. Just attending those events helps people understand key concepts with the cloud. And if we look at our professional services practice, they can be engaged to help you on a variety of requirements, such as the Cloud Adoption Framework engagement, which helps you build a solid strategy that covers all key considerations when moving to the cloud. Strategy and advisory bodies can also assist, and experiential days we talked about earlier. So look, we're achieving a number of things here. We're talking about transforming, but what and how? Well, I think the obvious one is we're obviously changing technical skills. You undoubtedly have skills in your organizations today. This is about bringing them up to cloud skills, which is a slightly different set. It does build on other IT skills. We've also talked about cloud fluency broadly across the organization. This means being able to have much better conversations with your stakeholders in your organization. And on this solid foundation, I truly believe that customers are able to affect their culture. And in fact, Australia Post, John Cox will talk about what's been achieved at Australia Post a little bit on this. For me, there are two other final things I'd like to touch on in terms of what are the benefits of these skills development programs. And One of the biggest ones is organizational strength. I see customers achieving stronger organizations because of their investments in their people. At an individual level, I've talked about this a little bit before, professionals are more effective. They're reporting to feel more effective in their roles because of the training and certifications they've invested in. And this makes sense. They've actually worked hard to achieve those. Those are not necessarily easy accreditations to achieve. And also, at an organizational level, we also see that organizations are able to achieve higher rates of retention and even talent attraction in some cases, especially, of course, if you're communicating about the investments you're making in your people. So, all of this has to yield a result, of course, from a technical perspective as well. And that story I shared with you earlier was not entirely complete. It is a true story. An actual customer said they're moving all in, and for about a year, achieved little. But thankfully, of course, the story doesn't end like that. Eventually, they did invest in a comprehensive training plan, and you can see that it massively accelerated their migration. And they were able to start achieving some of those promises they made to their stakeholders, things like cost savings, as well as being able to work on more innovative projects. So look, we're reaching a close to the first part of this session. If I was to summarize, I would really say this, my customers are different from what they were doing. They're doing different things to what they were doing a few years ago. They're no longer training just a few experts. They're really going broadly because they understand that this is going to help them improve collaboration internally, reduced costs in a number of ways, and one of them is actually just being able to leverage the benefits of the cloud platform. And of course, it also means being able to do those better projects that we all want to work on. Things like machine learning, it requires a solid foundation as well. So, enough from me. Without further ado, I'd now like to welcome John Cox from Australia Post, sorry.
Thanks, Yves.
Thank you.
Self-service.
Yeah. So John, thanks very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Can you give the audience a little bit of a context into what you're doing with AWS over at Australia Post?
Yeah, so we've been working with AWS for about 7 years. So we've got a large digital presence that we've built on the cloud. But more recently, what we've been starting to do is work deeper into the cloud. Sorry, deeper into our core. So we're picking up our event management system, which is really the heart of our business. So it tracks parcels and gives notifications to customers, and we're starting to build that into the cloud itself. So a really shift from taking our legacy environment and then actually starting to build it in a cloud-native sense.
So an event management system at a company like Australia Post, yeah. I cannot imagine the size of the challenge of that.
Yeah, so we do about 5 billion events a year, and we expect that is going to triple in the next 12 months. And that's as a consequence of our investment in automation. So we're scanning automatically as parcels go through our facilities. We're also wanting to enrich that, because at the moment it's very much what's happened, and we're starting to look at, well, what should happen and what is likely to happen. So when I say what should happen, I mean, should that parcel be at that facility and delivered to that property versus where it should be in time, but then what is actually going to happen based off some other fingerprint of behavior.
Yeah. So obviously these are complex problems to solve.
Yeah.
What has been your strategy to address these challenges, and perhaps specifically the skills side?
Yeah, so the skill side's a huge challenge, and it's not something that we think we're going to be able to solve in like the 12-month time frame. Actually, just we spent 30, 40 years building our current state, and it's going to take more than a year for us to actually build it cloud native. So we're not planning on doing a complete lift and shift at this moment. We're actually trying to rebuild the core, and that's part of a simplification agenda. So the way we've approached it is general awareness raising, as you described. We run a regular session, we call it an Agora, where we talk about what's actually going on within Australia Post, but also externally. We've had AWS come and present on really what is the cloud, what is AWS doing, what does that mean, what are the skills. So that's kind of that first awareness piece. And then we're doing some really quite targeted training. I call it just-in-time training for people who are going to be using those skills, so the developers. And part of that is, I've always found that when you train and then you use it immediately, it sticks. So that's a key part of the strategy. And then for our architects, we're training all of them in AWS. So that's for our existing workforce, and we've got a very clear strategy of where we're going from an application landscape perspective. And so as part of that, there's a workforce transformation, and we want to make sure that the people who are already in the company, we're giving them that opportunity and being quite clear on what are the opportunities that they can train in. So that's the technical dimension of it. There's also a broader education with the board and with the executive that we undertake. So that's the internal piece, and really leveraging the rich business knowledge and the technical competency that's there. On the second side, when we looked at the broader market, there's a skill shortage. So we knew that we had to do something different. So we created a program which we call the Australia Post Tech Academy, and the intent there is that we're picking up people who actually don't have a technical background. We filter them for learning agility, for technical aptitude, but not technical experience and skill. And often they're coming out of mid-career. They've got fantastic business knowledge, world experience, but not actually technical experience. And as a consequence, we selected a group of these individuals. We ran the program. The program's running for 2 years. The first 3 months are really a boot camp to teach them the technical skills, the ways of working, and really leapfrogging actually a lot of the technical skills that are coming out from graduates at the moment. And then they start working on technical problems, and we give them on a monthly basis additional training. And a key part of that is our AWS uplift and focus on building out that skill base. And that's really to address the skills shortage. And part of the program, it's a fully paid 2-year program, and at the end of it, then we'll find them long-term roles within Australia Post.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I was actually reading an article just before this session about, people are more and more willing to change careers completely if they're given the opportunity actually to learn, right? Most people are curious by nature. Yeah,
it's amazing actually the enthusiasm that the Australia Post Tech Academy associates have. It is unusual for a company to say, we're going to invest in you for 2 years in the middle of your career when you haven't actually necessarily worked. About 80% were external and 20% were internal, so people from the facilities or frontline retail staff who had that learning agility and hunger. And I've always found in my career, some of the best technologists are those who've come from a business background, because they get the context and they work out what tools they need to be able to do the job. So
that's a very good point, actually. Yeah. And so what do you see are the benefits of your programs, be it the Tech Academy and also the investments you're making in AWS training in the long term?
I think there's a number of key benefits. One is, we're investing in people, and we're being very clear about what skills we want and that people can make a choice. And that in itself creates engagement, because people are in charge of their own destiny. They don't have to worry that they're working on a legacy technology that then they're not going to have an opportunity, right? So very important for us to look after the existing workforce who have, in many instances spent, years and years working for Australia Post. There's clearly the benefit of the cloud itself. Moving our event management system, to take that as an example, to an environment where we can essentially enable 100% uptime, right? And that is an expectation that our customers are increasingly wanting, as well as the speed at which we can build it. We did a proof of concept, and we're able to do it within a 6-week period to show that you could take the code, rebuild it, deploy it, and test it. It's a minimum viable product. We haven't got it out running in production, but it's a very simple, you can take the building blocks and build at speed that we haven't been able to do from the older technologies. And then I think actually it's about changing the narrative of who we are as a company. We've seen massive decline in mail, this huge uptake in parcels, and very early on, pre my time, it was clear that we had to transform not just what we did, but how we did it to be relevant for our consumers. So I think that's actually part of the narrative of the organisation and how it's transforming, how it works, as well as what it's doing.
Great. Well, look, we're coming to a close for the session. Was there any final thoughts you wanted to leave the audience with? I think
just in terms of the training, the piece that, and it probably seems really obvious, but I spent most of my career in financial services, and this is the first time I've worked in a government business entity. But often what I've found is that there's training budget that sits there, and you get to the end of the year, and it doesn't get fully used. And I think what we've done differently, and part of the work that you've been assisting us with, is building a strategic plan for your workforce and being very targeted about the uplift. And I think if you can take the time to do that, it's actually not as much effort as it seems, but it's taking that consciousness to really shift what you train people in. That would be the one piece of advice that I would want to leave people with.
Great insight. Well, thanks very much, John, for your time. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
So look, the session has come to a close. I'd like to encourage you all to check out AWS Training, which will help you get started on the foundational piece. And certainly, if any of you have any questions, feel free to reach out. This is my email. I'd be happy to help you build a plan for yourself and your organization. Thanks a lot for your time.